Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about the general information for animals, so let's not waste any of your time, let's get right to it. Now we're going to be talking about animals, and we're going to start with animal body plans. Planes is coming up, and so I used the wrong word there. But some key things to think about, or some of the things that we're going to be talking about, is symmetry in the body plans. What's that? There's three types of body plans, and we're going to talk about those, and then we'll get into the biogenetics and homeostasis. Of course, these are not all this video, it's just overall. And then, of course, tissues. We'll get into those and what those look like, especially connective tissue, which is a kind of a generalized term, but it just looks different in each one, so we will talk about those. So let's get into some symmetry. Now, when we're thinking about symmetry, you can see the three main types there. Obviously, you got your asymmetry, which is non-symmetry, meaning it's just a shape that doesn't have any distinguishing things on the right or left are the same, or top or bottom or anything. It's just you can think of sponges would be the ones that come into the idea of most of that. And not all the sponges, just some of the sponges may be. A lot of sponges are just circular in nature, or certainly not the kitchen sponges, the rectangles that you'd be thinking about. That it's not that, and I don't even know if that stuff's made out of true sea sponges anymore, like it used to be in the early days. But then you got your radial symmetry, things that are circular in nature, to where no matter where you draw the dissecting plane, you're going to get the same. On the left or right. You can think of a pizza the same way when you cut a pizza. If you do it just right. If you do it in 4s, that's not too hard. Do it in 8s, not too hard. Do it in 6s, that's actually kind of the trickier the ones to do, because at least with 8, it's quarter turns. Keep doing quarter turns and you're all right. But and then bilateral symmetry, which is us, where you make the dissecting plane and you have the same thing on the right or the left. The butterfly is a perfect example of that. You draw a plane right through the center of the actual body, and you've got the right and left side is exactly the same. Now for bilateral, because of the body shape, it didn't take. There's lots of examples of these, but you got the different shapes that lead to, especially like the fusiform shape, which is like a dolphin or a torpedo or an airplane. That very aerodynamic sense. Penguins are that way, birds are that way. Really makes it more efficient moving through the medium that they move through, whether it's air or water. Us not so much. Because of our wide torso, even there are people that can run fast, there's a lot of wind drag and resistance because of our flat front surface, which is why we don't. Well, there's a lot of reasons why we don't have the speed of like animals and stuff, and dogs even have that fusiform type shape with their noses out and their thin bodies. But that's the three types. The bilateral does a much better job as far as work and functionality and kind of getting things done, especially movement. Even if it's something crazy like the undulant movement, movement created by making waves, like a snake would move, or an eel, or see who else moves like that. But anyway, that's the idea that bilateral is a much more motion-oriented, work-oriented type body plan. Now, when it comes to to shape or body size especially. There's some things that we want to remind ourselves of, and then apply those things and how they work in the body. But don't forget about diffusion. Cells get their materials through diffusion, and back in that would be chapter 3 that's introduced because of the macromolecules. That sounds about right. 4 would be organelles. It wouldn't be then. So if you think about, well, you know what? It might have been chapter 4. Anyway, whatever chapter it was. Don't forget about diffusion. There's a section in that chapter, or whichever one it was. Might have been plasma membrane. You know what? I think that is right. That gives you some factors that affect diffusion. Temperature, distance, that type of stuff. Density. So if you think about cell size, cells are restrained not because of their own admission or their own rules, but diffusion is one of those factors that would limit the size of a cell, because if it gets too large, it would take too long to diffuse the materials across the cell, and it wouldn't get the resources that it needs, and then the cell would die. So they're constrained by size for a lot of reasons, and diffusion is one of the main ones for that. So that means the cells can't get too large. They get too large, they don't get the resource across, and we've already covered that ending. So what that means is that if the cells can't get too large, that means a mouse, if you compare a mouse and an elephant, the elephant doesn't have larger cells, it just has a lot more cells. Even a mouse may have, millions of cells. So an elephant, we have trillions of cells. So you can just imagine what their number is. But it's not larger cells; it's more cells. And of course, I mentioned you got to get all those resources to the organs and through everything. So if you think about how size would affect the organism, and we're going to talk a little about this when we get into the ectotherms, the insects and stuff. I mean, it's nobody loves sci-fi movies more than I do. And growing up, we had the ants and just the super large bats and stuff. But in reality, that isn't possible. If you think about an organism like an ant, that if it would get that large, just how long it would take to get resources across. And if you think about size and weight, and there's a funny scene in Big Bang Theory where they debate animals getting larger, but the sheer weight of the exoskeleton of a ant, if it was the size of a car or even a human, would be tremendously heavy, and the leg structure and everything probably couldn't support actual real movement. So those kind of movies are cool in nature, or cool in thought process and to experience, but just overall not reality, because a lot of it is cell structure. But that would be more of a case of if you increase the ant, the weight of its exoskeleton would be a tremendous burden to its motion. All right, next up we want to talk about planes. We were talking about plans, now we're going to talk about planes, and not airplanes, but planes as in cross sections of organisms. And we're talking obviously bilateral here. There are 3 main planes to take a look at. The first one, diagonal. That's not really a helpful line but obviously a diagonal line would be just crossing the body in a diagonal line. I didn't really mean to use the word as the definition, but diagonal is kind of diagonal. It's kind of hard to explain. You can make the hand motion or the air motion, but everybody all knows what a diagonal line is. But the 3 to consider, and of course they have different names they go by, the old system, the new system, which if you have me in class long enough, you'll understand that I simply hate that process of if we've got a textbook have both, you go to websites and they have both, you're like, and then you get in front of a quiz and all it looks like you have, instead of having 3, it looks like you have 6. So just pick a word and quit and refuse to use the other one. But anyway, it is what it is. But your mid-sagittal or your transverse line, you can see there in the diagram, that is a line that separates the top and the bottom. And when we do in A&P classes at the high school, when we do dissections, these are things that we have to consider early on in the school year, because when you get into dissection guides, they'll use these phrases. If you don't know what they are, then if it tells you to cut a transverse line along the torso of the frog, you're like, okay, well, what's that? But a transverse plane cutting the top and the bottom, and for us, that would be parallel to the ground. Okay, but not all organisms that would be parallel to, that would not always be parallel to the ground. If you think about a dog, okay, where would a transverse line be on a dog? It'd be perpendicular to the ground. It's the same line separating the top from the bottom, but their motion, their body position is a different plane than ours. We're upright. Okay, they're walking on all fours, so it'd still be a transverse plane if I took, have a plane that separated the top part of the dog from the bottom part, just at a different angle than ours. The coronal plane separating the front from the back. Again, for us, it's upright. It'd be perpendicular to the ground, but for a dog, separating the front from the back, that'd be parallel to the ground. So it's the same plane. It's just because of their different body structures, it's a different angle. And your sagittal plane separating the left from the right. For us, again, let me think about this. For a dog, it would be separating the left from the right. No, it'd be the same plane as us. It'd be upright, right through the nose and the snout and backwards to the tail. So if your dog has a tail, got a tailbone, may not have a tail, but that's the 3 to consider. And I didn't mention the coronal also is called the frontal, which is more of the common term, more one that's used now. And for mid-sagittal, transverse is the more common, the newer, updated word for that. Okay, another thing to consider for animals is the body cavities. The body cavities, as you can see here, some of them they're called cavities, but they're really a collection of cavities. They're not actual cavities themselves. Like, for example, your dorsal cavities simply incorporate all the ones on the back side. Would be our back side, your cranial, your spinal, you can see there. And then your ventral, the front, and it's actually top and bottom, dorsal being the top, but because we stand upright, it just looks a little different than be like if it was a dog. If it was a dog dorsal cavity, that'd be the top part, the part facing the sky, and then the ventral would be the belly underneath. But for us, because we stand upright, as the rare case of that, we're the outlier in that. Our ventral is facing forward and dorsal facing back. But the ventral, you got your thoracic, where your heart and lungs is, and your abdominal, obviously, where your stomach and your digestive system is, and then your pelvic cavity, where the urinary stuff and reproductive stuff is, things like that. So, and the last thing to consider is types of skeletons. Typically, you hear about the 2 exo-endoskeletons, but there is a third one in a small minority. But think about it. If you think endoskeleton, that's skeletal structure on the inside. That's what we have. And the exoskeleton, where your skeletal, your armor is on the outside, it'd be like insects. So like when you step on a beetle and you hear that crunch, that's the exoskeleton being busted up on the bottom of your shoe. But think about a jellyfish. Which of those two would a jellyfish have? A hardened outside shell? No. Muscle or a bone system inside? No. They've got the third type, the hydrostatic skeleton, which is simply a kind of a fluid-filled environment and compartment around, inside of skin tissue or muscle tissue, and that's called a coelom. So that's the three types of skeletons. So that's our video over animal general information. When we come back next time, we're going to be talking about endotherms and ectotherms. We'll see you then.